If there's anything you ever need, if you have questions on life, if anything is ever, you're not sure how to approach something, feel free to have that open dialogue. Let's sit down and talk about it. You need to have a child be able to feel comfort level of sharing things, of expressing things.
Leeann, thank you for joining us today on the Generation Youth Podcast. Thank you for being our guest.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, we do appreciate you being with us today and sharing what can really be a complicated topic, a sensitive topic, and a topic that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to discuss at all. But before we even dive into that, our audience always would love to hear more about our guest, who they are, a little bit about their story. So if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about yourself with the Generation Youth Podcast community.
Absolutely. And welcome to all those who are listening today. I really appreciate the time for you to take this opportunity to really listen in on Generation Youth and what all the guests and myself have to offer. I'm Leeann Sherman, President and CEO of the American Association of Suicidology. I've been on board about a year now. And a little bit of background about me, I was not in the suicide prevention and awareness space. And I think many people who are involved in the suicide field will come from either a passion from something that they've either experienced themselves, or a loved one, or they really feel drawn to helping people in this field. And I would tell you just a quick little story that really comes, I think, full circle here and the topic we're talking about today. When I was 16, my best friend was sexually assaulted, and she had a very hard time emotionally dealing with it within her family, who was very religious and kind of very what we call prim and proper in the days. And granted, I'll tell everybody I just turned 50, so if you can do the math, you can see how long, how many decades ago that was. And having said that, she really had a hard time coping with everything and couldn't find that support both from counselors or, whether it's medical community to her personally get through. She was able to get through medically and heal, but her self-esteem and just being able to find people. And she ended up dying by suicide within a little less than a year and a half. So it was about 17 months after. And at the time, I couldn't comprehend that it occurred. But I also was a teenager myself. You're both 16 at the time, and then 17 when she died. If you fast forward that, and I really, it's not that I don't talk about it publicly, it just hasn't come out in many situations. But 2.5 years later, when I was in college, I was sexually assaulted, and it was very violent. I ended up in the hospital, and it was almost a rebirth of looking at it from my best friend's perspective. I luckily had individuals at the university that I attended. I had friends and family who maybe not, or obviously not the field, but they supported in the way that they could. I approached it from my perspective. We all have ways that we can overcome things or ways that we cannot and need help and support. And so that was at a tender age, what I would still call youth, at 19 years old. And it really set the pace for me, I think, and how I approach things. I approach challenges, things that I cannot control. And then when do you say, I need help? Can you get the help? Where do you get it from? How are you able to talk about something that's stigmatized? And so to circle back now, years later, I've had many things in my life. I think many of us who are adults have, those youth that are listening. There are challenges and things in your life that you'll appreciate, whether it's a divorce, or whether it's getting married, having children, death of a loved one, or exciting things, promotions, jobs, buying a house, medical situations that come up. You have highs and lows, and not everyone deals with things in the same manner. And, for me, that evolution of ebbs and flows in my adult life, the passing of my mother, myself having cancer, and then having a stroke at 40 years old, you start to look at things from, it's just another challenge. It's a way to get through. Not everyone can look at it the same way. And the last thing, James, is, less than 2 years ago, about 18 months ago, our house caught on fire. And I was actually at my honeymoon with my husband out of the country, and my son was home from college. It was Thanksgiving. My daughter is 16. She's at her father's and we lost everything we owned, we built. My mother had passed away, and it was everything. I had a purse, 2 of the 3 of our animals, and it was another triumph in my life. And at this point in time, I said, I've got to do something more. So this is why I'm with AAS. I looked at my career, my life, my personal lived experience, and said, how can I give back? How can I do more? And I think that's now why I'm here, is because I wanted to be in a space where I can do something with both my lived experience, my knowledge, my education, and make it better. You look for ways to improve people's lives.
Leeann, thank you for sharing. Thank you for that. That sets us up really for a very good conversation going forward. What brings us together, obviously, is the topic of youth and suicide. And unfortunately, we have seen an alarming increase in the rates, especially, at least from the numbers that I have. You probably have much better access and later numbers than that. In the younger demographic, 10 to 14, it seems to be increasing so much. And we're seeing as much as 1 in 5, based on CDC surveys, that are contemplating this or thinking about this, youth that are thinking about this. What's happening here? What is going on? Why is this increase happening? What, based on your experience and the knowledge your organization has, what do you think is driving this? Because I know as a parent, I'm listening and I'm alarmed at these statistics. And my first question that I want to know is why.
Yeah, and boy, I would love to give you. Here's your answer. Like,
yeah, I knew laying that question out there. Well, I contemplated, how do I ask that? Because but it's a question we want to know. I mean, an audience, literally, Leeann and I are not going to give you the concrete answers because there are so many intangible things, but we can maybe give you some insight.
Absolutely. So there's several things with several factors that both us as an organization, researchers, community leaders, loved ones, you start to expand upon and really look at why our youth are in positions of either suicidal ideation or in a suicidal crisis, or maybe they are just teetering on what we would classify as suicidal ideation. They maybe haven't thought suicide was the word, but they know that they are in a very critical period. And what we're seeing, and a lot of different things. Obviously, I think some people fully understand the bullying, the cyberbullying, that aspect of, used to be maybe, James, when you and our kids, it happened in person at school, and maybe on the sporting field, and now it can literally reach you. That bullying can occur everywhere, every day, every minute, because of either social media or being able to pull in that network. So it used to be talk to one person or maybe be on the phone, and now you put something out there about someone else, true or not, and it can go viral. It can spread like wildfire. That is one of the big things that we are seeing, and it's a lot of that has to deal with educating people, educating parents, getting people more involved and engaged with the youth. But that doesn't solve it all. What we're also seeing are several things, such as there are many different things that are socially accepted and socially unaccepted. It's confusing for the younger mind, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but some of our research is there are so many things out there, whether it's gender identity, whether it's coming from a specific type of household or household environment, whether it's your demographic, whether it's your, where you live, reside, play, work, whether it's having access to food security or any of standard things that we would consider everyone should have, shelter, food, clothing, and everyone has different social economic things that they come from. And that right there, it's confusing for our younger people because those individuals don't really understand having careers, having bills. How do I navigate when your parent loses a job, or if we have to move somewhere because some situation happened? Growing up in maybe a housing situation that's not the most ideal. and they don't navigate intellectually or neurologically that ability to really reason through. And so everything for a younger person is really more instantaneous. This is how I feel. This is what's happening now. This is what I see in front of me. And that reasoning and ability to problem solve hasn't truly developed. So to ask the questions of a parent, a teacher, a clergy, someone in the community, a neighbor, a friend, it's difficult for them to voice that. It's difficult for them as a younger person to be able to express how they think it is. And so a lot of it is held in, and then they don't really know what to do with that. So that is a thing for that really younger generation. Now, again, it can be any number of those factors. And you start to move up further into that 10, 12, 15-year range. Now you really start to get, as their brains are developing, as they're developing relationships with other individuals, dynamic of relationships, you start to see those teenage years where, let's be honest, you're either in a crowd, you're not in the crowd, you're part of this, you're not part of that. That weighs heavily on the teenage years. And then you start to look at, what am I going to do in 2 or 3 years when I'm out of high school? Am I going to get a job? How do I get a job? What education will I have? Am I going to school? Pressures start to increase. Well, we're seeing, and this is not for everyone. Obviously there are those individuals with mental illness. There are those individuals who have post-traumatic stress, or have been in traumatic situations. So I'm just talking very general terms, James, but there are a lot of stress and pressures in youth who do not necessarily have the neurological or ability to pop themselves, as I mentioned, to get through them on their own, and they don't quite always know how to communicate it. So it puts them into this, let's call a hole of how do they get out? How do they seek help? And it's really up to the adults, I think, in this situation where we need to be vigilant, we need to be perceptive, we need to give them a safe space to have a conversation, even if they can't voice it in the words that we're expecting. We need to break that stigma and make a safe space and a safe place for our youth to talk about whatever it is.
Wow. Those align up to a lot of the things that we have discovered just on the basic level. We interviewed over 2,500 youth, asked them what they thought the biggest issues and problems facing their generation were. And once we got the answers, we categorized them. And the two biggest areas, one was their identity, their self-image. Who am I? Am I a person of worth? If they view that as a negative portion, that's going to impact this. And the second one you hit upon too, and as they move into high school, is relationship skills. Where do I belong? Where's my tribe? And those two issues are so crucial. And then the third one being, what am I here for? How do I set goals to accomplish my purpose in life? Which I even read somewhere that one of the solutions maybe for the opposite of depression was not happiness, but the opposite of depression was purpose. And I thought, that's a great concept as well.
And if you don't mind, James, one of the, I don't want to say it's the largest thing or the most important thing, because it's not. There are several things when we talk about suicide prevention. I just want to clarify for me, and I'm talking from my perspective as a non-scientist, non-researcher, non-psychologist, with someone looking in the field. Social isolation, loneliness, purpose, those are all words that are so meaningful. What am I supposed to be doing? Why do I exist? What is my place? And that place doesn't have to be huge, right? We as adults, we're thinking about our career. We're thinking about our spouse, a significant other, if we have one, if we want one. We're as a parent. All of those things, and by community, children or youth, depending on the age, right? I mean, they need to know now, right? They need to understand it, and then they need to be able to grow with that understanding. And that's a really hard place. So social isolation, loneliness, purpose are really, really big things that we need to pay attention as adults and as communities.
Wow, that's deep. I love that. So as a parent or a teacher, educator, someone that's listening to this, that is like, I understand what you're saying, some of the causes are. What are some of the signs that I need to be on the lookout for? What do I need to be observant for? Because my daughter is 13, and in her class, a grade ahead of her last year in school, a young lady committed suicide. And one of the things that I heard most often to people surrounding is, we never had a clue. We never had a clue. We didn't see any signs. So, and I know there's not 100%, hey, there's a checklist here, look at the checklist. That's what we want, but those don't exist. But what are some signs that they could look for, be on the observing for, as we work with these youth to make sure that we can help them?
Thanks, Jay. So I want to talk about the concept of having signs, right? Signs, we'll call it symptoms, things to look for. If we really want to be honest about suicide awareness, suicide prevention, and not just suicide, but what I call kind of pre-prevention, right? We want to get individuals out of the age before they're struggling, right? Before they get into a situation of contemplating suicide or having suicidal ideations. Signs, when we think of things, we think of, what are the signs of a stroke? There's an acronym for it. What are the signs of a heart attack? Your left arm, what's that happens, blood pressure raises. What are the signs of when it comes to flu? A runny nose, a sore throat, strep throat. These are all health things. And we as a country, and even as a world, look at signs and symptoms as they're a telltale thing to say, okay, this is probably what you have. Let's start to treat. But we don't do that as much or as well as we probably should when it comes to mental health, when it comes to suicidal ideation, when it comes to really recognizing things that happen with individuals at any age. And so, yes, it's important for youth, but if you think about it, it's also a peer-to-peer. So is happening in your workplace, teacher to teacher, counselor to counselor. They're all the same kinds of signs. You just have to look at the age group. So when we're looking at signs in youth or individuals, some clear ones would be, not having friends without sitting with anyone at lunch table, right? Some really basic things, at least that. Are they doing things that they're more alone for? Do they have times when they cry or maybe are emotional? Their focus, whether in class or when they're, and some may say, well, is it a medical condition, ADHD or something else? But are they really feeling as though they should be there? Should I be listening? I'm thinking too much about the problems that I have, and I can't focus in class. You also want to look for, and this is very difficult, teachers who are listening, they're spending, 7-8 hours spending with someone else's child. And you can't put it all on the teacher or in the people who work in the lunchroom and the bus driver, but they spend a lot of time with our kids, with our youth. And so then, more than anyone, as well as clergy, sports coaches, really take a look at the actions or the inactions, right? So you see a whole group of children at recess playing, doing this, doing that, and you see one child maybe sitting with another child, and they come up on their own. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. They can just be introverted. They could be those who don't want to play, dodgeball and baseball or swimming the things. But you have to start piecing these things together. So you see one sign, which is social isolation. You see another sign, pulling away from things or not being involved or interested. You see another sign, maybe as a parent, whereas they come home, they want to sit and have family dinner, they go to the dog room. Another sign of this is in no way, shape, or form about video games or watching YouTube, but they're not interacting with individuals. So those type of things of watching YouTube and maybe being on video games, unless you're interacting via the new game, they closed in their network. They're really secluding themselves. And so these are some of the bigger signs. And so these are also signs of adults. But in children, they also don't know how to express it any more than their actions. So you look for actions and you look for inactions. Pulling away, social isolation, that being alone, being okay to be alone, not really listening or paying attention. You also can see in some outbursts. They don't know how to deal. So they've got this pent up either anger, upsetness, rage, just complete confusion. And so you see outbursts or Some would say not being kind or not being able to, you know, do things that are socially acceptable. Those are some of the signs that we normally see. But again, as you mentioned, not everyone has a sign.
Yeah, are there any groups or demographics of youth that are more at risk than others, or maybe even situations that they're going through? Because I'm thinking, as we list some possible signs and indicators, it's like a funnel, and if we can get a little bit more, it'll help folks kind of focus in a little bit, understanding the audience on what we're talking about. There are no, as I said before, there's no checklist.
Well,
Here, you've got to be observant. We'll discuss a little bit more about what we can do in a minute. But
so there are, and from some of the statistics, and again, this is not, not everyone, and some may agree or disagree, but what the statistics have been data, what the research is showing, is that we're finding Native American, as well as some BIPOC community, which is the Black, Indigenous, people of color, they tend to be more at risk. They tend to be the higher level of those who are having suicidal ideations or even death by suicide. Some of the things that we're seeing and hearing in the research, and again, this doesn't mean that it's the blanket example is in Black communities, what we've heard is, it's usually, church, family, and then self. And so if you're dealing with your church and your family and your self-worth comes at the very bottom. And that may be, and it is, from some of the research we've seen, within communities, within families. And so it's really about your church and your family absolutely are important, but yourself is just as important, if not more. And so allowing our youth and our individuals to be able to say, it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to reach out to someone and still have faith and family as priorities. What we're seeing in some of our Native American or, Indigenous people is that they're in similar ways. They're especially in our Native American as well, very similar to our Black community, is that they're looked at as family, as groups, as people who are, the better way of explaining it is they have heritage, they have social things that they build within being a Native American or being someone of color or being whatever that may be. And so those always come first. And the individual, not so much. You don't necessarily see that in a Caucasian, right? And that's just scientific data, that you're seeing that more of those communities. We're also seeing it in the LGBTQ. Obviously, as you talked about a little earlier, is self-worth, understanding, valuing, and within yourself, but having others validate that. And so that group, while luckily it is growing so they have support amongst themselves, it is still not a group of individuals who truly feel as though there's not a stigma anymore about being LGBTQ+. And all of those factors, when you start putting people, not that we want to, into studying them as groups, individuals, heritage, religion, there's not enough research out there to say this is a definitive. We haven't studied those groups segregational enough. The question is, do we really need to study them in a segregated manner? Probably to find some data, absolutely, because there are differences among people on how they deal with heritage things and family traditions or religious aspects. We see nowadays a lot of things across the world. For those listeners who are not familiar, there's several countries and states in Africa who are now banning punishment by death, LGBTQ. If a family member or friend is aware that someone is, they can serve up to 20 years in prison. So you've got very distinct views around the world. And so we don't have enough research, but what we can say is within communities, within families, within heritage, within those types of generational, you're starting to see where it's coming out that there is a stigma, but we don't talk about it. And in those groups as much, that's where you see the higher, well, we've seen the higher rates of them of the suicide ideations, because it's just not something you can consider. It's not something you want to talk about. It's not something everyone should talk about.
I'm seeing I'm seeing too from some of the studies that suicide ideation rates are higher for girls than they are for guys. Now, death by suicide tends to be higher for guys than girls. Am I right on that? Is that accurate?
That is
Why?
Mhm.
What's the deal going on there? Why is the ideation higher? I understand why I have a theory about why the death by suicide would be higher with guys than girls. But what is going on there?
So let's first hit that ideation. And again, research done it, still need to do a lot more, but what we find is, first of all, the genetic makeup, the way females think about things, how they process things. Obviously, the old books that men are from Venus, women are from Mars, or whatever it is, there is some truth to that. It's how we process, right? How you look at things. Women maybe at times thinking cognitively or through the problem solving of how they look at a situation and evaluate it very differently than men. And when we pull that down into youth, right, and we look at the pubescent age group and we look at who evolves first, who starts to go through puberty first, you see, men, boys tend to go through it at a slower pace, a little longer pace. Women start puberty, the hormones, the chemicals, those things happen at an earlier age. So there's a scientific piece to that, right? I think everyone can understand that part. Girls by nature, let's be honest, we see a lot of them. Again, this is that stereotypical, but girls tend to be sometimes more sensitive. And this is not every girl. We have men that are very sensitive, but in that pubescent stage, they're finding themselves. You may have girls versus boys who care more about their look, care more about either friends with, what they're doing, how they're doing it. Boys at a younger age or in that childhood and youth age, they want to play sports and they want to be in this group, or they hang out with their friends, and that's all okay because their view and their vision of that nascent state is different, both from a chemical, neurological standpoint and from the puberty spectrum than a girl, right? So some of it is really science related and how, we see those factors coming through. And then you start coupling the environmental factors and bullying and everything else into it, your demographic. It just compounds that.
So we've got listeners now who stuck with us for 30 minutes, and they're like, "All right, I'm on the edge here. Give me something that I can do. How can I help? So let's start with a parent. What are some things that a parent can do? And again, these questions are like some parents are like, yeah, give me a list, give me a book that I can read to tell me those things. It really, I think, education and understanding more. But if we could give them a starting point, something that they could, some tips to help them, or something to get them started so that they can at least have a little bit less anxiety towards this themselves. What would you recommend to a parent that you can help?
Yeah, and hopefully this helps some parents. And it does sound very basic, and some might say, I knew what, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that checklist. But I would say, have an open dialogue with your children from literally the moment they are born. So it's ingrained in how you parent. And that doesn't mean if you've got an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old, you can't start now. You can sit them down and say, listen, if you ever need help, if you need to talk about anything, we're here. I'm here. Your aunt is here. Your grandmother, right? It doesn't have to be a parent. It could be another loved one, family member, or a friend who is very close to that child. So it doesn't just have to be the parent, right? It can be a very close family friend. You can sit that child down and say, if there's anything you ever need, if you have questions on life, if there's anything that's ever, you're not sure how to approach something, feel free to have that open dialogue. Let's sit down and talk about it. You need to have a child be able to feel comfort level of sharing things, of expressing things. It may not be what we as parents are prepared for when they sit down with us. That's first and foremost. If you have a youngster, or a baby or a toddler, and you have the opportunity now, those listeners, who can start this quickly, is always have that. Whether it's over the dinner table, so there's things within a family you can do. Have dinner together. Ask about their day. What is going on? Be interested in art projects at school. I mean, we as parents get so busy, we need to kind of go back to that engagement. Now, I understand sometimes we have single parents that maybe are working multiple jobs or working off hours of their children, whether police officer, medical field, things that, require constant 24-hour positions and careers. You don't always have that time and ability, but you need to make a little time. Is that child or individual? Remember how I said they're in the moment, they're instant, right? With that interaction, they feel things immediately. Take the time, take a minute, driving them to school, picking up McDonald's or whatever they be through the drive-through. Have a conversation. It doesn't have to be in depth. It can just be letting them know that you're there. Talk about things that maybe aren't necessarily themselves the hard subjects. How do you feel? Is anyone bullying you? No. Have just general conversations so that you build a trust, you build a bond. They know that you're interested in them. Those are really very, very important. The other piece of that is, if you're concerned, there are resources out there. You or other individuals in your family can take some classes that are in communities. You can take mental health first aid, depending on where you are. You can take a class on safe assist. You can take CPR training. So any of these words, Google and find them. You can also go to, and here it's not a plug, but we work directly with YouTube on what they call a health panel. So if you Google many different words, many different things, and I Google you search in YouTube, we help them to secure different words, sentencing structures, and there'll be a plethora of resources, videos, TED Talks, documentaries, information that a parent, a school teacher, a loved one, a neighbor could access. If you really need to talk to someone, you can call the local crisis center. You can call a non-emergency number and say, I'm struggling, I don't know how to reach my child, or I'm unsure of signs I'm seeing, are they even signs? And they can either put you in touch with someone or can help you themselves, depending on who and what's in your community. And I think with that, you can call 988. You can call, text, chat. 988 is now bilingual. That just sold out in July. So 988 started in July of 2022 with an official rollout. And then July of 23, it's now bilingual. Working out 24, hope to have an ASL or video for ASL, but that's not quite out yet. So there are resources within communities. There are resources online. But I think a real important thing is take a few minutes every day and just have a conversation that allows that youth, that person. But it's also peer-to-peer. I just want to remind people, even though we're talking about youth today, have a conversation with your spouse, your friend, your coworker, right? Because adults also get into that space. So just a reminder for everyone out there. And if you yourself, you need some help, dial, call, chat, text 988, or look to some different organizations. You can pretty much find just about anything. We have trainings, bars and more for those within the field and the field of study, the field of work. But just make sure you engage.
I love the communication part. And one of the myths I think we could dispel is that some parents feel, and some adults feel, I don't want to talk to them about suicide because it will give them an idea. It'll put it in their head. And I had a recent podcast guest who had written about this. She's a nurse practitioner and studies this and worked with it. And she had talked to me and said, you're not going to put an idea in their head that they have not already had in their head. So that's a fear that we need to dispense. So audience, again, if you listened to us a month ago, you heard this, let's echo it again. Don't be afraid to talk about things that are subjects that are sensitive for fear of, I don't want to give them an idea. And that can be not only suicide, but we can talk about it in terms of, drug use or alcohol use or sexual use, all those types of things. They're already thinking about that. What it does is the inverse.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
By talking to them, it gives them a space to, I might get talked to. Now, it's going to be awkward. Especially if they're, like you just said, hey, don't worry if your kid's 15 years old, you can start there. If you wait till 15, it's going to have some awkward times.
It will. It will. But as a parent or a loved one or a teacher or clergy person, friend, neighbor, do you not owe it to them and yourself to give that? One other point I want to make that we're talking about youth, and as I started, kind of telling my story, and one of the things we're seeing in research, and I want to bring it up because they are youth, is our college students. We're seeing a very heavy, at least data-centric right now on loneliness, and that a lot of college students are having suicidal ideations. There is so much transition. Yes, our youth transitions between kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, and then there's always challenges with that and anxiety with that. And we need those parents and teachers and loved ones to be able to help them through that. But there is a huge transition for most individuals who come out of high school are a little bit more sheltered. You're with your parents or with grandparents, loved one. You've got now that sheltering of teachers, and all of a sudden you are now an adult. You are, whether you're 17 going away to college or you've turned 18 in that time frame, you are now an adult. You're living on your own. You're doing your own laundry. You're eating or not eating. You're getting up for class. You're showering or not showering. You don't know anyone unless there's something in school that are there. And even so, they're in different class schedules. We are seeing this rise amongst college students. And we have to remember that there's a huge transition for them, that they need to be able to have conversations and talk through it. Luckily, many schools and universities have break programs. But here's the thing. If they haven't had that feeling as though it's okay to talk with people, they're not going to reach out to those programs. No matter how much marketing schools and universities do, know how much wonderful programs are available, if a student, an individual, hasn't been brought up through parents to schools to say it's okay to talk about it, then they won't reach out. So we need to make sure we don't forget those individuals in that college time frame when they're out of their own. And even those who are not going to college. If someone graduates high school and decides to move in with a few friends and get their own apartment and have a job, they're still transitioning, and it can be lonely. And they are in a point in their life where they are now doing things they have never done before. And they're in a space that they have never been before. And we need to remember that as adults, that just because they've gone off to college or they turned 18 and got the job, then now they're just this miraculous adult and they can handle everything. So they're still our youth, and they're still individuals that need us as adults to support them.
And to add to that, and I don't want to run down this rabbit hole because this could be a whole other hour of talk. Is coming out of the pandemic, those who were high school students during the pandemic and had their juniors and senior years turned upside down and did not have. I was a teacher for a decade, and I can tell you that starting at the end of junior year of most students, teachers, not consciously, it's not like we have a teachers meeting and say, hey, we got to start treating them different because they're seniors now. But we start talking to them differently. We start acting differently. They get different events. Those things didn't happen. Those are all things that were preparing them for that launch. And then what happens is what you said is all of a sudden they are launched and they're not ready for it. And, I agree with you. That's another thing. Another topic that I wish we had time for is that I didn't think of until you said a while ago when you were talking about peer-to-peer. It made me think, too, of how do we educate the youth to be conscious and be able to help their peers? Because we know from data and interviews and live situations that our young person is more likely to share their feelings of loneliness, isolation, of depression with a friend or someone they know than they will a trusted adult. So that's a whole nother world right there.
It is a whole other world, and I just want to give you a few pieces of data for the listener. So, as I mentioned, 988 rolled out last July, and it rolled out in a very, what we're going to call not this massive marketing thing, right? Because you needed to build the infrastructure. It's a program, federally funded, And then it comes down through, and then states are, are funding it as well, different crisis centers. There's a whole different slew of ways that it's getting funded. We're not getting funded, so I want to break that up, that we need to support this 90-day infrastructure. But what we're finding is there were about 5 million calls in the first year for a program that was technically not marketed. Everybody knows 911. And when you talk about 87% of Americans do not know what 988 is. Now, we're now in our second year, right? We started the second year. And what we're seeing is that, yes, the calls have risen about 40-some%, right? But the chat feature, the chat and the text feature have risen almost 1,100%. Now, I'm going to be a little stereotypical here and say our younger generation are the ones chatting and texting. So that tells you they want to talk to someone who can understand where they're coming from. And what we're also hearing from crisis centers is that a lot of them have a youth crisis individuals who are working, volunteering, maybe people in high school, people in college. They go through a lot of extensive training. So it's not just sticking a 16-year-old on a phone line or to answer chats, obviously. They have to go through a lot of training and make sure that they're able to be able to answer these chats and texts. But what we're seeing is you need and want, to your pointing, to talk to a peer. They don't want, and what we've been told in our research is an adult, as a parent, as a loved one adult, we tend to want to fix a problem. Here's a problem, let's fix it. You do this, 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 and this. And we want to teach our children, this is how you fix it. You want someone to talk to. You want to talk through it. They want to be able to know someone else is listening, someone else has gone through it, going through it, understands it. And that's what we're finding. And that conversation is very different from a peer-to-peer adult and a peer-to-peer youth. So just a reminder about, as we built up and listening up for the youth that are listening, yes, it's understandable. You need and want to talk to someone who is in that space, or been in that space, or recognizes it. And that's what we're seeing. It's really happening out there.
Well, Leeann, how can our listeners, our community, get in touch with you guys? How can they connect with you guys so that they can learn more, or are there even other places that you would send them as well? So share some resources here in our last couple of minutes together.
Absolutely. And you click our website, suicidology.org. It's our website. We have a plethora of resources. I will tell you that we have an extensive amount of new trainings that are coming out within the next 3 months. So there'll be a lot more things. We're putting together and updating a ton of toolkits and resources, peer-to-peer, adults, parents, community, clinicians, schools, universities, counselors. They'll all be really dropping within our website. You can also sign up to receive our newsletter. We've got a lot of up-to-date information and statistics, things to use. There's a lot of other places too. On our website, we do have a resources stage. And so we have resources for, as you talked about, different types of ethnic backgrounds, LGBTQ, different types of heritage and BIPOC communities. We have individuals, resources for those within the clinical field, parents. We also talk about equal needs. Goes back to a point that you had earlier about why men tend to do it. Men tend to use a gun or something more parts, like intend to use pills or something like that. We have resources out there to kind of show you different things. There's also a place on our website you can see where is the help in your community. But it's not just us. Every county, every state has some sort of, whether it's the Department of Health, the Department of Human Services, depending on the state that you're in, you can always reach out to your state agency and look at your county. If you were to look, any of your listeners, where they will look at your county government, there's some sort of mental health, human services within your county government makeup. How some may be too small and defer back to the state, but there is helping your community. And just a reminder that if you dial, call, chat, or text 988, they can also be very particular about giving you resources in your community. So if you're not sure where to go, there are all those other things I said to you, go to YouTube, go to some trusted sources. because you want to make sure you're getting good information. The CEC has a lot of information out. But inside your community tends to be sometimes a little bit better if you need something sooner and quicker. He's on the put you in touch with counseling services or maybe a little hospital or entity or things that make sense within your community.
An audience, everything that the resources and the links that you talk about is in the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously look down, hit show more, and there's the notes. If you're listening, just go to your podcast app. You'll have in the show notes on there. You'll be able to find that. Again, thank you for this conversation. This could be a multi podcast episode just because of the depth of it, the seriousness of it. But I so appreciate your passion and your commitment to this. And thank you so much for joining us today. It really, really has been impactful for me. And because I took pages of notes. So I hope the audience did as well. I was writing stuff down. And I was kind of worried, she thinks I'm not paying attention, but I'm writing stuff down. So.
No, absolutely. And we look forward to your listeners being able to find resources and support that they need, whether for themselves or for those individuals that care about, or those individuals in the community. So hopefully we'll continue to listen to your podcast and we'll seek those resources if they move them.
Thank you so much for your time. And audience, thank you for sticking with us. Listen, if you've been listening with us for almost 50 minutes, you have found great value in what you're listening. So therefore, you know someone who needs to hear this as well. So please like and share it and comment on this. Subscribe to the podcast so you can get the updates on this. And thank you for being a part of our community today. And we'll see you again soon on the Generation Youth Podcast.